My name is Elodie Clark, and I'm 33 years old. Thanksgiving dinner has a way of turning into a battlefield when your family measures success in square footage. That particular evening, I had driven 2 hours to my parents' house in Connecticut, brought a homemade pie, changed into something presentable, and walked through that door with a genuine smile on my face. I was tired from a long work week, but I wanted to be there. I wanted to feel like family. That was my first mistake. The table was full. My Aunt Patricia was there with her husband. My cousin Derek, who recently bought a condo, was talking loudly about refinancing rates. My sister Vanessa sat at the far end, perfectly dressed, perfectly composed, already deep in conversation with my mother about her third property, a vacation rental in the Berkshires that was apparently pulling in $6,000 a month. I sat down quietly, poured myself a glass of water, and told myself to just get through the meal. The food was barely on the plates when my father cleared his throat. He has this way of doing it, like a warning bell before an announcement that nobody asked for. He looked down the table directly at me and said it loud enough for every single person in that room to hear. "Still renting, Elodie?" The conversations around the table slowed. Forks paused midair. I felt the heat crawl up the back of my neck, but I kept my expression steady. I said yes, I was still in my apartment in the city, and I was doing just fine. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. He leaned back in his chair with that look he gets, the one that's somewhere between disappointment and performance, and he said, "Your sister owns 3 homes. 3. And you're still paying someone else's mortgage every month." He shook his head like he was describing a personal tragedy. "You're the embarrassment of this family, you know that?" I heard my mother murmur in agreement. She actually nodded. Not a hesitant, uncomfortable nod, a firm one. Like she'd been waiting for someone to finally say it out loud. The table went completely silent. My cousin Derek suddenly found something very interesting to look at on his plate. Aunt Patricia took a long sip of her wine. Vanessa didn't say a word in my defense. Nobody did. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry, even though something sharp and cold was pressing against the inside of my chest. I just reached into my jacket pocket, took out my phone, and set it on the table in front of my father. Face down. He looked at it. Then he looked at me. I said nothing. I just held his gaze and waited. He picked it up. I watched his face as he turned it over. I watched the exact moment his eyes found what was on the screen, the property management portal I'd had opened since before I left my apartment that morning. The one that shows rental income, lease agreements, and tenant profiles. The one that had his name on it. His full legal name. Robert Allen Clark. Listed as the primary tenant of the 2-bedroom unit in the Hartford property I purchased 14 months ago, the one he'd been renting for below market rate because I'd told the management company to keep it quiet. Because I hadn't wanted to make it complicated, because despite everything, he was still my father. The color drained from his face. Not gradually. Not slowly. It left all at once, like someone had pulled a plug somewhere behind his eyes. My mother stopped nodding. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, my father had absolutely nothing to say. I picked up my fork, took a bite of the sweet potato casserole, and let the silence do exactly what silence is supposed to do in moments like that, tell the whole truth without a single word. What happened at that table didn't come out of nowhere. It was the result of 10 years of quiet, deliberate work that nobody in my family bothered to notice because they were too busy measuring me against my sister. Let me take you back to when I was 22. I had just graduated with a finance degree and a student loan balance that made my stomach hurt every time I looked at it. I moved into a studio apartment in Boston, started working as a junior analyst at a mid-sized investment firm, and lived on a budget so tight that I packed lunch every single day for 3 years straight. My father called it scraping by. My mother said I needed to find a better paying job. Vanessa, who had already married a man whose family had money, sent me an article once about negotiating your salary. No context. Just the link. What none of them knew was that I wasn't just surviving. I was studying. Every spare hour I had, I was reading about real estate investment, watching the market, talking to people who had built something from nothing. I wasn't buying clothes. I wasn't taking vacations. I was saving with a focus that felt almost obsessive, because I had decided early that the only way out of being talked down to was to build something they couldn't ignore. By 26, I had enough for a down payment on a small two-family property in a mid-sized Connecticut city, not glamorous, not in a trendy neighborhood, but solid. Cash flowing from the first month. I kept living in my apartment. I kept my lifestyle exactly the same. I reinvested everything. Nobody in my family knew I had bought that property because I never told them. I wasn't ready for the questions, the unsolicited advice, the comparisons to Vanessa's more visible success. I needed to build in silence. By 29, I had 2 properties. By 31, a third. The Hartford unit, the one my father was renting, came almost by accident. A colleague mentioned a landlord looking to sell quickly due to a relocation. The numbers made sense. I bought it through my LLC, the way I bought everything. My property management company handled all tenant communication. I had no idea my father had applied for that unit until 3 months after he moved in, when I was doing a routine review of the portfolio and saw the name on the lease. I almost called him that day. I picked up the phone, put it back down, and sat with it for a long time. Part of me wanted to tell him, wanted to watch his reaction, wanted some small acknowledgement of what I had built. But I knew how that conversation would go. He would find a way to minimize it. He would say I'd been lucky, or that the market had just been favorable, or he'd pivot immediately to something Vanessa had done. So I said nothing. I told my management company to continue handling it as a standard tenancy. I kept my distance. For 14 months, my father paid rent on time. I'll give him that, to an LLC that belonged to his daughter, the embarrassment of the family. After that Thanksgiving dinner, the drive home was the quietest 2 hours of my life. Not an uncomfortable quiet, more like the silence after a storm passes and you realize the roof is still on. My phone buzzed twice before I even got to the highway. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. Then my father. Same. I didn't listen to the messages until the next morning. My father's voice was different than I had ever heard it. Flat. Careful. He said he had some questions and would appreciate a call when I had time. No apology. Not yet. But the performance was gone. That loud, certain, table-commanding voice had been replaced by something quieter, and that told me more than any apology ever could have. I called him back 3 days later. We talked for almost an hour. He asked how long I had owned it. I told him. He went silent. He asked about the other properties. I told him about those too. There was a long pause, and then he said, in a voice I had genuinely never heard from him before, I didn't know. I told him I was aware of that. He didn't ask me to forgive him out loud. But something shifted in that call that I hadn't expected. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt tired of carrying the secret and oddly relieved that the weight of it was finally shared. He's still my tenant. He pays on time. We talk more honestly now than we have in years. And my sister Vanessa, who owns 3 homes, as my father reminded the table, called me the following week and asked if we could have coffee. She showed up looking less composed than usual. She said she had no idea I'd been doing any of this, and that she was sorry she hadn't asked. That conversation meant more to me than she probably knows. I'm not telling this story to embarrass my family. I'm telling it because somewhere out there is a 24-year-old who is packing lunch every day, reinvesting every spare dollar, building something in silence while people who are supposed to love them are calling them the embarrassment. This story is for that person. You don't have to announce what you're building. You don't have to defend your timeline to anyone. The work speaks eventually, sometimes loudly, sometimes quietly, sometimes face down on a Thanksgiving dinner table in Connecticut. Just keep going. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button right now, because every week we bring you real stories of resilience, quiet strength, and people who built something extraordinary when nobody was watching. You don't want to miss what's coming next.